Will it be bad news for Jeremy Corbyn, who has been flying high since the election? Labour won 40% of the vote share by deliberately rejecting the very formula which won them their biggest ever victory in 1997. Of course, the ideas of New Labour. Mr Corbyn prides himself on being as far from Tony Blair's policies and governing style as possible. So today we're asking, is New Labour all over? Joining me to discuss that are Catherine MacLeod, previously an advisor to the former Labour Chancellor Alistair Darling, and Owen Jones, the Guardian columnist and author. First of all, Owen Jones, if there is a deal with the DUP today and the government gets on a sort of semi-stable footing, is that bad news for Jeremy Corbyn and Labour, do you think?
Well, it's bad news for the country to have a coalition of chaos governing at a time when we need strong and stable government, as the entire election was called on that basis, of course. Obviously, the DUP are full of very unpalatable types, homophobes, climate change deniers, anti-choice, sectarian extremists. And they will have a weak, divided Conservative government over a barrel. It will further toxify the Conservative brand. David Cameron on social issues went to great pains to make them less toxic on those issues, with, for example, equal marriage, given the history of the Tory party in resisting LGBT rights. I think to be seen in cahoots now over a barrel with the most extreme party in the House of Commons, and with, for example, Michael Fallon, the Conservative cabinet minister, saying the Tories have more in common with the DUP than any other parties. I think clearly Labour are ahead in the polls. We're heading into economic turmoil, falling wages, and a coalition of chaos.
So tactically, it might actually help, you think?
Yeah, but I think the problem,
speed up disillusionment.
It's good from a party political perspective, but from the perspective of what's good for the country, we're in a real mess, and we're in a real mess because of the actions of two Conservative prime ministers who plunged this country into absolute turmoil. It's ridiculous.
What do you think? As a stable minority government, does that help Jeremy Corbyn?
It might. It all depends how we place it. If Theresa May has made sure that they're not going to be able to advocate their social policies in the House of Commons, don't think it will make very much difference. And I think to the country, I think people are so fed up with politics that they're wanting politics to work. It is chaotic. If Theresa May can grasp something from the DUP have always been in cahoots with the Conservative Party. This is it being formalised, so not much has changed.
And we can see the pictures now of what we think is going to be the agreement of that deal. There's Arlene Foster, the leader of the DUP, and Nigel Dodds, the leader of their parliamentary group, and also Geoffrey Donaldson, who has been involved in the talks here at Westminster, another MP, because Arlene Foster, of course, is not a member of the Westminster Parliament. And Theresa May coming out for a handshake, I think a sign of optimism in that, and posing on the doorstep. Now, what we understand is going to happen is that they'll have a short meeting inside, because Mrs May, of course, has also got her meeting in Grenfell Tower and her statement on settled status for EU citizens in the UK coming out. But we think they will be coming out in half an hour to an hour's time, and there will be some sort of statement in Downing Street from the DUP, rather from the Prime Minister. But what about the suggestion, Catherine, that you just heard from Owen, that actually climbing into bed with the DUP is just going to further toxify the Conservatives and speed up the mood of disillusionment with the Tories, which could lead to a Labour government?
I think it will further toxify the Tories, although, as I said earlier, I think the DUP have always supported the Tories. I think it will be very interesting to see how Jeremy Corbyn plays this, because I think the Tories will throw back his long-ago association with the IRA. And I think that if what your correspondent says is right, if they're going to lower corporation tax, but at the same time protect the triple lock and protect winter fuel payment, that will be very hard for the Labour Party to argue, because, interestingly enough, it was in their own manifesto.
Well, obviously, the fact is we know the Tory manifesto has been absolutely shredded. They had a calamitous election campaign when, whether it be on...
No, but actually, you betray the DUP as homophobes, but they're going to come out and say, look, here are these centrist policies that we've been backing.
Well, I don't think...
The Tories
this is it's just a government in paralysis. There's very little they can do. We've seen the Queen's speech already. There's very little in in that political programme. They couldn't get things through when they had a majority, which they got rid of after having an election to try and wipe out the Labour Party as an electoral force in this country. The Conservatives are in a real mess, but more importantly, the country's in a mess because of the actions of two governors. As, for example, Chris Patten, a Conservative, said yesterday, the actions of two Tory Prime Ministers has plunged this country in a real mess.
Yeah, but at the moment, the Conservatives are still the largest party by some considerable distance.
Well, we can talk. I thought that's what we were talking about.
Yeah,
we're talking about that now. Okay. Well, look. In 1997, when Tony Blair came to power, there'd been 18 years of Conservative government. I think to come from where Labour was in 2015, which was the worst result in seats since 1983, where all the odds were stacked against Labour, not just in terms of the polling, but things like, for example, the loss of Scotland, where Labour had collapsed as a political force, to get the biggest increase in vote share since 1945, to win seats that Labour have never won before, like Canterbury, like the People's Republic of Kensington, constituencies Tony Blair never won. I think, clearly, Labour are much closer objectively to power than they were. But critically, I think what the point is, and I think this is what we're supposed to be talking about, in the late 1970s, it was clear that the consensus, the political consensus that had been established after the war by Clement Attlee's Labour government, whether it be public ownership, high taxes on the rich, strong trade unions, that was in a state of collapse. And, because the Conservatives and the Labour Party both propped up that consensus, but it collapsed. I think we're seeing a similar phenomenon today, which is that consensus established by Thatcherism from the late 70s onwards, where both parties accepted the underlying principles of that. That is now collapsing, and we're seeing now that a Labour Party can win millions of votes, 13 million, and is now on course for government if things continue as they are, on the basis of rejecting...
And you see this with a clear break with Blairism?
Well, Blairism is dead, of course. New Labour was a product of the time. Good things happened under that government. Minimum wage, public investment, LGBT rights, I could go on. But clearly, that was a product of at the time, a sense you can't overturn what Thatcherism did. Labour now is saying you can. You can have a government where you ask those at the top to pay a bit more money to invest in public services. You can have public ownership, you can get rid of student debt, all these things can happen.
Do you think that's right?
Well, I think some of it's right. I think, of course, Labour is nearer government than it has been since 2010, and a good thing that is too. However, when we say that the Labour Party did better, so did the Tories. The Labour Party has still a huge mountain to climb. And what I think is very odd for the Labour Party, I think Ed Miliband started it, was rejecting the good things that Gordon Brown and Tony Blair had achieved, and they achieved a lot. And why has there to be a rejection of that to go forward into the future? Because quite a lot of the people who voted in 1997, 2001 and 2005 for what you disparagingly call New Labour, were pleased to get a Labour government. It changed their lives.
Yeah.
And if the Labour Party now is saying, we don't want any of that, that, we're a new dawn, a new party, we're going to do things completely differently, I think they might be rejected.
No, what they'll do is they'll build on the good things and reject the bad things. So, for example, a minimum wage. Under a new Labour government, that will become a living wage. Public investment, that will be, because we've seen a reversal of a lot of the good public investment New Labour did, this Labour government will ask those at the top to pay more money. That will reverse cuts in corporation tax. New Labour, like the Tories, kept cutting corporation tax to use that to invest in public services. This time round, though, there won't be privatisation. There won't be the public finance initiative. Instead of creeping private sector involvement, there'll be public investment without kind of allowing for profit to start overrunning our public services. Obviously it will...
But we don't know where the money's coming from. Well, and not even New Labour had a triple lock in pensions or, saying it didn't matter how rich you were as a pensioner, we were going to look after you. I mean, I don't understand that we're getting mixed messages from the Labour Party to say we're not letting millionaire pensioners, not contribute to their social care. It's very odd policy for the Labour Party to have when you see that they're taxing the rich.
Well, no, because obviously what will happen is, under Labour's proposals, which are fully costed, unlike the Conservatives, that will ask the top...
No, I'm not sure everyone agrees with
well, it is.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies don't, for example.
It was costed, and the Tories
they provided costings.
Obviously insulted the British public by not doing so. Now, they will ask the top 5%, those earning more than £80,000, to pay a bit more money, as well as reversing cuts to corporation tax, also having a financial transaction tax, which has been welcomed across the Labour Party. Rachel Reeves, who would be put on the right of the Labour Party, has welcomed that proposal. And that will be used, yes, to provide social care, without saying we will single out people with dementia to pay a huge amount of money, but not people with cancer. It's just common sense ideas.
Well, let's see if we can end on a point of agreement. Have you both been pleasantly surprised by Jeremy Corbyn's performance?
I think Jeremy Corbyn's done very well, and nobody can take that away from him.
You didn't like him much either at one
Well,
point.
I campaigned for him to become leader in the first place. I voted for him twice, but I thought the polling was an insurmountable mountain to climb, and I was absolutely wrong. And during that election campaign, which I threw everything into, I saw across the country people who've never ever voted before getting involved, knocking on doors, and New Labour couldn't have done that. What happened with non-voters, young voters, for example, people in
But
Scotland again.
New Labour won.
If we'd gone under the New Labour, if we did a New Labour formula,
say New Labour didn't do
yeah,
it?
but that's because it's a product of
In
the
the
1990s.
constituency nearest to me in Harlow,
Look,
New Labour won it 3 times. They lost this time.
New Labour never won Canterbury, for example, never won Kensington. And if we'd run
I think the evidence
if we'd
shows-
run on a New Labour formula this time,
Yeah.
we wouldn't have won
Well,
those
I think
those
the evidence
votes.
shows that Labour picked up middle-class voters and lost working-class
Well,
voters.
that's not true.
I think that's what the
You
analysis
can't
shows.
just end on an inaccuracy, by the way, because the share of the working class vote under Labour in this election went up compared to 2015. That's not true. They didn't lose votes.
Not compared to
no, it didn't. Not the share. The
1997.
total number went up because the total vote went
Yeah,
up. But
the vote and the share.
That's a
The
different
share
matter.
and the number went up. You can't end on inaccuracy.
I think that is disputable. Talk to
No.
John Curtis and Michael Thrasher about it.
The share went up. It's just you're saying more went to the Conservatives as a proportion compared to last time. But that's not the same thing.
OK. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you both.